The year was 1861, and the United States stood on the edge of a precipice. The tension that had been brewing for decades between the North and the South finally boiled over into what would become one of the bloodiest conflicts in American history, the American Civil War. At the heart of the conflict lay the issue of slavery, a practice that had divided the nation since its founding. But there were also political, economic, and cultural differences that had driven a wedge between the two regions. The southern states, with their economy deeply tied to slavery, feared losing their way of life. The North, rapidly industrializing and becoming more progressive, was increasingly opposed to the expansion of slavery into new territories. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, a man who was against the expansion of slavery, was the final straw for many southern states. They feared that under his leadership, slavery would be abolished entirely. One by one, these states seceded from the Union, forming their own government, the Confederate States of America. In response to the secession, President Lincoln refused to accept the breakup of the nation. He declared that the Union must be preserved at all costs. The Confederacy, led by President Jefferson Davis, saw this as a declaration of war. In April 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina the first shots of the Civil War, and the country was plunged into conflict.
State your name and your commitment
For the
to the
next
Union
4
cause.
years, the United States would be embroiled in a brutal war that would test the very soul of the nation. The war was not just about slavery, but also about states' rights, federal power, and the future of the American experiment in democracy. In the early years of the war, the Confederacy seemed to have the upper hand. With brilliant generals like Robert E. Lee, the South won a series of victories, pushing Union forces back and threatening to break the North's resolve. But the Union had its own advantages: superior resources, a larger population, and an industrialized economy that could produce the weapons and supplies needed to sustain a long war.
State your
One
name
of
and your
the key
commitment to the
turning
Union
points in the
cause.
war came in 1863, when General Ulysses S. Grant was given command of the Union Army. Grant, a determined and unyielding leader, quickly turned the tide of the war. His strategy was
State your name and
simple
your
but
commitment to the
effective:
Union cause.
grind down the Confederate forces, wear them out, and never let up. At the same time, the Union Navy, under the leadership of Admiral David Farragut, was blocking southern ports, cutting off
State
vital
your name and your
supplies.
commitment to the Union
But the
cause.
Confederacy's greatest challenge came not from the Union Army, but from the people within their own ranks. As the war dragged on, the South's resources began to dwindle. The Union blockade strangled southern
State your
ports,
name and your
and the
commitment
lack
to
of
the Union
industrial
cause.
capacity made it difficult for the Confederacy to replace the weapons and supplies lost in battle. At the same time, the Confederate government struggled to maintain unity as some states grew frustrated with the
State your
leadership
name
of
and your
President
commitment to the
Davis
Union
and
cause.
began to question their commitment to the cause. The Union, meanwhile, was not without its own struggles. The war was deeply unpopular in many parts of the North, especially among immigrants who resented fighting to end slavery.
State your name and your
The
commitment to the Union
draft,
cause.
which was introduced to bolster Union forces, sparked riots in cities like New York, where working-class citizens fought against being forced into military service. Meanwhile, Lincoln himself faced intense political opposition
name and your
from within
commitment
his
to
own
the Union
party,
cause.
as some felt that he was not doing enough to end slavery or win the war quickly. In 1863, Lincoln made the bold decision to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, a landmark executive order
State your
that
name and
declared
your
all
commitment to the
slaves
Union cause.
in Confederate-held territory to be free. While the proclamation did not immediately free all enslaved people, it shifted the focus of the war from simply preserving the Union to a moral struggle to end slavery.
State your name and your commitment
It also
to the
opened the
Union
door
cause.
for African Americans to join the Union Army. And over 180,000 African American soldiers would fight for their freedom in the war. The war reached its climax in 1864 and
State your name and your
1865.
commitment to the
In the
Union cause.
East, General Lee's Confederate Army was finally pushed back by General Grant's forces after a long series of bloody battles. At the same time, in the West, Union forces under General William Tecumseh Sherman
State your name
were
and your
advancing through
commitment to the
Georgia,
Union cause.
devastating the South with their brutal march to the sea. Sherman's tactics of total war were designed to destroy the South's ability to fight, burning crops, tearing up railroads, and laying to
State
waste
your name
towns
and your
and
commitment
cities.
to the Union cause.
As the war entered its final stages, the Confederacy's collapse seemed inevitable. In April 1865, General Lee, surrounded and outnumbered, was forced to surrender to General Grant at
State your
Appomattox
name and your
Courthouse in
commitment to the Union
Virginia.
cause.
The surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia marked the end of the war, but it did not end the pain. Over 600,000 soldiers had died, and the country was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered Union.
State your name and your
But the
commitment
war's
to the
impact
Union
was
cause.
not just about the physical toll. It was also about the political and social changes it wrought. The 13th Amendment, passed in 1865, abolished slavery in the United States, marking a new era of freedom
State
for
your name and your commitment
African-Americans.
to the Union cause.
However, this freedom came at a cost, and the Southern states, though defeated, would struggle with the legacy of slavery for decades to come. In the aftermath of the war, the United States entered a period known as Reconstruction,
State your name and
during
your
which the
commitment to the
Southern
Union
states were
cause.
gradually reintegrated into the Union. The federal government passed a series of laws designed to protect the rights of newly freed African Americans, including the 14th and 15th Amendments that guaranteed equal protection under the law and voting rights. However, the South resisted these changes, and after the federal troops withdrew in 1877, the region was left to implement its own system of racial segregation and disenfranchisement.
State your name
The
and your
Civil
commitment
War
to the
had
Union cause.
reshaped the nation. It preserved the Union and ended the institution of slavery, but it also left deep scars that would take generations to heal. The war brought about a new understanding of what it meant to be an American and set the stage for the country's future struggles with racial equality, civil rights, and the balance of power between the states and the federal government. The legacy of the Civil War is still with us today. The fight for racial equality, the struggle for justice, and the ongoing debate over the role of government in people's lives are all shaped by the events of that war. The Civil War was not just a fight between two armies. It was a battle for the very soul of the nation, a battle that would determine the course of American history for centuries.